Titanfall's metagame has finally reached its endpoint. Loadouts and playstyles have settled enough in the past few months that I'm confident it's not going to change significantly ever again. Let's take a look at all the Titan loadout options that the game has to offer and establish how to make some highly optimized combinations to improve your game. Let's begin with the 3 Titan chassis. The Strider in Titanfall's current metagame does see some play, but that's about it, just some. At a high level, you might be seeing it as a one-of in some teams, and in other teams you might not see any Striders whatsoever. In public matches, Striders are a lot more common, in my opinion, just because the skill level in public games is a lot lower, and people are not really as good at punishing Strider picks. Their weaknesses basically boil down to this. Does the mild increase in top speed, acceleration, 1 extra dash, a smaller body, smaller critical hit points, and the presence of dash core truly differentiated enough from the Atlas to make it worth using? This same series of questions applies to the Ogre, actually. Does a slightly larger health pool and the presence of shield core really outweigh the negatives of slow movement, a big body, and huge critical hit points? For both of these edge case Titans, I kind of think that the answer is no. In the case of the Strider, the dash core trounces the aim of quite a lot of players in public matches. A Strider player that really knows how to use their dash core to make themselves a nearly impossible target to effectively hit is pretty much able to, if you really want to think about it this way, double, triple, or even quadruple their overall health for a limited time. Basically, the reasoning behind that is if nobody can hit you, they can't damage you. And if they can't damage you, then, they're doing less damage per second against your Titan, so you might as well have, more health if you consider they're doing the same damage per second. It's a weird way of thinking about it, but that's kind of the way that I consider it and think about it. So, basically, because of all this, you kind of sort of get more health whenever you have the dash core up, as long as your basic conditions of making that core effective are met, which are essentially a wide open area in which you can move around effectively and not have walls near you that they can splash off of to kind of hit you that way. If you couple all this with your utility of the dash cores, infinite dashes, and capture the flag, you have a totally passable Titan that, when played well and to its strengths, will serve its niche effectively and will serve a team positively, and whether it's in competitive play or not. Unfortunately, I can't also say this about the Ogre. Sitting at about double the Strider's just whole health in general, not even counting for the shield, the Ogre pretty much has an innate second health bar in comparison to the Strider, and does that quote-unquote second health bar really stack up? So, in my opinion, and in the opinion of most other competitive level Titanfall players, the answer to that question is no. Having extra health doesn't really mean much if you're not able to leverage it as an advantage over the enemy team and turn that into kills while surviving with your own Titan. Titanfall is a game of speed and mobility, and if you lack that, you're just not able to keep up, both figuratively and literally. In a one-on-one fight against a Strider, let's say, an Ogre with a 40 mil versus a Strider with a 40 mil, just straight up one-on-one fight. The Ogre has a lot of time to simply beat up on the Strider and hopefully kill it before the Ogre is killed back. If the Ogre pilot has good aim, he should be able to take that Strider down without losing any more than half of his health bar. However, due to its inability to be an evasive target, in combination with huge critical hit points on the front of the Titan, and a highly killed Strider pilot being very evasive and able to just straight up dodge shots entirely, the Strider pilot is very liable to do quite a bit more than half of the Ogre's health bar and damage before they die themselves. In a straight up fight, especially one in which the Strider has some sort of cover to use strategically, the Ogre is just not able to keep up. Its lack of evasion and huge crit spots hurt the Titan so much that it's just about not even able to compete. The little bit of extra health just does not really make the difference. Even if the Ogre is beating the Strider over 50% of the time, if the Ogre is only surviving with like a sliver of health, is that Ogre really winning? Like, is he really able to take that last little bit of health and survivability on his Titan and presumably a shield core that is now at the ready? Can he really make a huge difference with that? And that's kind of where the argument lies. And in my opinion, I don't really think that that difference is really able to be made in most cases. Before we move on to the Atlas, though, it's unfair if we don't bring up Ogre's core ability versus Strider's. Assuming that the Ogre allows Strider to get a full recharge when dash core is popped on the Strider shields, he gets 1 extra life bar during a fight plus damage mitigation in the form of Strider's unparalleled evasiveness. Ogre's core ability is an uninterruptible, 2 extra life bars, if you really want to think about it that way. I certainly do. The Shield Core offers Ogre no extra benefits other than that. No damage mitigation, no increase in damage output, no increase in evasiveness, absolutely no benefit other than a sudden burst of 2 extra shield bars. So on its own, the Ogre Shield Core is pretty lackluster. Because of its slow nature, it's tremendously easy for an opposing Titan to just break off the engagement until the Ogre's Shield Core expires, and then use that to their advantage in dismantling the Ogre systematically. On the other hand, we can't just assume all Titan fights are 1 versus 1. The place that the Ogre starts to suck a lot less is in bigger team fights, when Ogre's got a Shield Core ready and the team is in possession to make a really aggressive push against an enemy team. The Ogre can quite literally lead the charge and soak a big hunk of damage for their team while also providing them cover just due to its literal size. It's just a chunky Titan. You can stick an Atlas behind it and kind of almost see over the Ogre if you're, kind of trying to shoot over his shoulders. The Ogre is kind of shorter than the other ones, and you can kind of sort of shoot over it in some cases, depending on how the terrain is laid out. So you can use him as pretty decent cover, just quite literally a hunk of metal for your Atlas or Strider to hide behind. If the enemy team decides not to focus that Ogre, then he deals free damage to the enemy team, and it doesn't really matter that he's using an Ogre versus an Atlas. He's just dealing free damage and not taking any hull damage whatsoever. If they do focus him, then they're not hurting your team's true DPS, which is going to be your Atlas players. They're not going to be doing damage or inhibiting the aim of your Atlas players, so they're going to be able to, ideally, I guess, improve their ability to do damage to enemy teams. On paper, it sounds like this makes a lot of sense, but in practice, this never really works out that effectively for whatever reason. Teams have tried doing stuff like this with Ogre pushes, and it just falls short when they really could just be playing a team of 6 Atlases with 40 mils arc cannons and a chain gun thrown in there, and they do even better than if they try to make that Ogre push happen. There's just not enough. There's not enough broken crap involving the Ogre in order to make his offense seem really, really, really effective over just mashing a team of 6 Atlases with damage core, and using particle walls and effectively recharging their shields behind the particle walls with their damage core activations and all that stuff pairing together. It's so synergistic that the Ogre falls short. I'm not entirely sure if the Ogre is falling short because of it just being tuned down a little bit too much. It's not quite powerful enough in its own right, or if the synergies that exist with Atlases and the rest of their kits are just so great that the Ogre falls short just because it doesn't have those synergistic things going for it. So not really sure where that falls. I'm kind of thinking it's just the Ogre being undertuned more than anything else, but in the current metagame of Titanfall, that Ogre is just not really useful in competitive play and barely useful in regular play as well. If I'm playing in public matches, I feel very gimped using an Ogre when I could be using a Strider or an Atlas. So there's that. So at this point, let's go ahead and just bring up the Atlas in general. So the Atlas gives you a great compromise between the Strider's mobility and the Ogre's survivability, while also giving you the best core ability available, the damage core. The Atlas is able to cover ground quickly in a dead sprint, and is able to soak a lot of damage in 1 versus 1 fights, all the while dishing out extra damage over the other Titans with its core ability being activated. Whenever the damage core is activated, after the short windup of course, Atlas's shields begin instantly recharging back to full. If you pair this with Shield Quick Charger, then you have a nearly instantaneous full recharge of your shields, as long as you're not taking damage from an enemy Titan to interrupt that. So while this idea of shield recharging, being started by your core activation is also true for Strider, in my opinion it's a lot more important on Atlas, because in the situations that damage core is popped, you're often going to be behind a particle wall or near some other form of cover, meaning that you're able to be nearly guaranteed the benefits of that second life bar in the form of a second shield, while also dealing the biggest possible damage. It's not really as true for Strider, because a lot of the times when you're popping dash core, you're either going to be out of combat entirely and just about to enter combat, so your shields are not down to begin with, or you're losing a fight and you're in the middle of fighting, and your enemy's going to keep hitting you, and you might maybe get a quarter of your shield back before they hit you and prevent that shield from recharging any further. So the health regen on the Strider, it's possible, but just not probable. That's all. So, plain and simple, the Atlas is good enough at doing the things that both the Strider and Ogre do, while also having the best core ability in the game that is just by far the most used Titan in competitive play, and should be your Titan of choice no matter your level of play. So next up, with all that said, let's go ahead and start talking about all the Titan weapons. What's good, what's bad, and everything in between. If you guys have seen all my Titan weapon guides in the past, you'll note that I was for the most part positive about the ability of each weapon to perform in the right light. This time around, we're going to be a lot more realistic. Some of the Titan weapons are pretty terrible in comparison to the frontrunners, so it's long past due that we make these distinctions here, and honestly, I'm going to be very frank and very clear with my opinions on each of these weapons. If you disagree, that's fine, but, take my opinion for what it's worth, basically, is all I'm trying to say. Coming in at last place with the worst Titan weapon in the entire game, we actually have the Quad Rocket. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me on this one, but just hear me out. I'm aware that the Rapid Fire Quad has the potential to do the highest DPS of any Titan weapon in the game. I get that completely. But in spite of that statistic, it still falls dead last on the list. Why is that? Well, the rockets are slow traveling, and you have to hit pretty much all 18 of them. If you only hit about 13 or 14, your DPS suffers quite a lot, and you begin to enter the realm of other weapons just straight up being better and more reliable. Alright, so we've established that we've got to have pretty good accuracy with this weapon in order to perform effectively with it. Can we shoot enemy Titans' feet and still do well? Can we splash them to death? Unfortunately, with the rapid fire attachment, not really. Rapid fire quads have pretty terrible splash damage values versus Titans, as you can see in the video that I'm linking right about here. So if you haven't seen that previous video where I really kind of went into a little bit more depth with how splash damage on the quad rockets work and, direct hits versus splash and all that, I advise you to go ahead and pause this and check that out, just briefly, just to kind of get the idea of the differences there. But once you've done that and you're back here, we pretty much are able to understand that you've got to be going for center of mass with the quad rockets, with rapid fire in particular. The regular quads are different, but specifically rapid fire quads, you've got to be going for center of mass, just period. You have to be getting direct hits on the enemy Titan if you want to do good damage, period. That's just the way it has to be. So, alright, we've established that we need to be aiming around center of mass, and that we need to hit the vast majority of shots in our magazine. We also know how slowly the rockets travel, so obviously, we've got to be pretty up close and personal to an enemy Titan to have the best chance of doing that. First instinct is to throw this on a Strider, use your extra mobility in terms of the higher maximum speed and an extra dash in your repertoire, plus the faster dash recharge, blah blah blah, whatever. You basically want to use that mobility to get in and be evasive at point blank range. But as it turns out, you don't have a lot of health when you're running a Strider. You just don't. So attacking from head on is in a lot of cases not an option. So more often than not, you're going to have to resort to things like flanking tactics and trying to catch enemy Titans that are distracted with other targets, which is doable in a lot of cases. In public matches, it's doable. But let's think about two things here. One, if you're actively sneaking behind an enemy Titan with your own Titan, is unloading all of your rockets into their back over the course of about 4 seconds at point-blank range, nearly, better than just hanging back a bit and laying into them with a 40mm cannon. Because, let's be honest here, if you're in close enough range to an enemy Titan to start hitting a bunch of quad rockets on them, they're close enough to you to use some counterplay to what you're doing and actually dash into you. Just dash directly into your face and get literally point blank in fisticuffs range with you. And if you continue to shoot them with your quad rockets and you keep firing and firing and firing at point blank, you're going to start eating butt tons of splash damage from your own weapon, plus the damage they're dealing to you with their weapon from point blank. And, if you're brave enough to keep firing, of course. I do this personally to pretty much any rapid fire quad player that does that to me, right? So if they get too close and they start unloading into me, what I'll often do, if I think they have, pretty good aim and they're going to be hitting you with those rockets anyways, then I'm going to literally dash into their face and do the best that I can to stay locked with their movement at point blank. Now, if I don't think they're that good with the rapid quads, and if I'm evasive, they're going to miss a lot of shots, then I'll do that. But if I think that they are, an aware player that can actually aim and predict my movement, and will hit me with, 13, 14 rockets, I'm just going to say screw it. Enjoy having all 18. You're going to hit all of them. I'll take that extra damage. But in return for that little bit of extra damage that I'm allowing you to do, I'm going to take a lot of your health back as well. And I'm going to make it really easy for me to dismantle you with my 40 mil from point blank. So that's kind of the mentality that I have when going into it. And more often than not, you just lay those people out. Just straight up. They take so much splash damage from their own fire that they kill themselves. So what I've come to realize over time is that the only real reason to use this weapon is pretty much to kamikaze suicide into an enemy Titan and hopefully take him out in a 1 versus 1 situation just by sheer brute force. A lot of the times that does end up working. I lose my Titan in particular to players that do that to me very often. Especially if I don't have anything like a particle wall at the ready to help me defend myself. So yeah, a lot of the times it does end up working. However, they also lose theirs pretty much 100% of the time as well. And I know that I've accomplished a lot more with my Titan in the time that I've had it prior to me getting blown up by that. I've accomplished more than they will with that Titan, so there's still a net gain on my part. It's pretty much a desperation move, that instead of doing something positive for your team, and being proactive for your team, you're being reactive. You're simply trying to prevent more negative things from happening to your team in a last-ditch effort to stabilize. The weapon, like I just said, it's reactive and not proactive, and that's pretty much why I think it's bad, right? It's not a proactive choice in any case. It's always reactive, and a lot of times reactive is just not quite good enough to win you games. It's just not. It just slows down the inevitable, if anything. Before we move on, I'll briefly note the standard quad rockets. While you can do decent splash damage with them, and using them with Atlas Damage Core is surprisingly acceptable damage, without that damage core, your DPS is pretty lackluster. Use this weapon only if your aim is not the best, and you're just looking for an explosive that's going to give you some versatility, both versus Titans of all types and versus grounded pilots. It's a reliable weapon, it's an easy-to-use weapon. I hate to really call it particularly bad, but, it's just outclassed. And that's just the truth of the matter. It's outclassed. Coming in at number 5, we have the Plasma Railgun. So, it's a long-range weapon with travel time, making hits with it a little bit more challenging than they ought to be at times. You have to charge it and move around at a snail's pace for a few moments before it's ready to fire at full strength, which is pretty disastrous if you've ever been caught out of position while trying to do that. So the idea here is that you're going to be so far back on the battlefield that this won't really be a problem for you, and if it ever does become a problem, you've probably been far enough behind your team all game that it should be easy enough for you to loot a 40mm cannon off one of your teammates' corpses to defend yourself at closer ranges when that time comes. So I wouldn't even necessarily call a lot of these things huge negatives of the weapon. It's okay for a weapon to be really good at a couple of things and terrible at others. That's fine. That doesn't necessarily make it an awful weapon straight up. It's really just a matter of, are the good things about this weapon powerful enough that it makes sense to use it over a comparable weapon? Or is this weapon powerful enough that even despite its drawbacks, I'm still able to do things with it that I can't do with anything else, or I can do them way more effectively than I can with something else? And in a lot of cases, I think this weapon falls short on those mechanics. So it's not inherently bad in a lot of ways, and it's great that it exists. But outside of LTS, and oftentimes in LTS as well, a chain gun fills the exact same role as the railgun: long-range support damage. In the time it takes you to strip the shields from an enemy Titan and work through, say, half its health, you can roughly do the same with a chain gun. However, in the case of the chain gun, you never have to worry about leading your shots, and you're infinitely more capable versus pilots in all scenarios, and in scenarios where you're getting flanked and have to suddenly defend yourself. I don't think the railgun's a bad weapon. I just think that the chain gun is so versatile that it's pretty impossible to justify using a railgun outside of LTS. So a little bit more on that later. And, as I was kind of even reading this, I was just kind of thinking, perhaps the railgun might actually be better if the Titan rocket salvo ordnance was better. That's a little thought I just had while reading this, and that's kind of interesting to think about. Maybe I'll talk about that more later as I ponder a little bit more. But let's hop over to number 4. Okay, so time for the triple threat. This is a weapon with some really interesting mechanics that translate well to all 4 of the quote-unquote main game modes of Titanfall. Triple Threat can be built around and worked into a team composition in Attrition, Hardpoint, CTF, and LTS with great effect in each, and Frontier Defense as well. I think it's probably the best Frontier Defense weapon, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about PvP. So, Triple Threat does things that other Titan weapons cannot do, and serves purposes that other Titan weapons cannot. Or if they can, the Triple Threat matches them or beats them out in that niche. So, let's give 2 big examples. First, imagine yourself on Outpost 207. You're standing right at the middle of the map, and you've got a gaggle of pilots on top of B roof. If you're not sure which one that is, it's the building on the opposite side of the huge cannon. The building with the jagged, ribbed roof. If you've got some enemy pilots up there, and they're harassing you and your team, how do you deal with them? A chain gun or 40 mil or arc cannon could do the job if you're quick on the draw, and you can catch them for the brief moment that they're exposed. But the Triple Threat doesn't care about any of that. You just saturate the area with explosives that are all on staggered timers. The whole roof becomes a death trap for those that don't get away in time. This remains true for just about any rooftop in the game on any map. You're able to deny space with this weapon, so you can reach out and touch people in ways that no other weapon in the game lets you accomplish, and that's what makes it really cool to me. The other example would be in CTF game modes for a pretty similar purpose. Area denial is huge in CTF. In competitive play, there are constantly scrambles to pick up or return a dropped flag. Only way to do this is to get a pilot on it. A pilot has to touch it physically in order to interact with that flag, but Titan can't do anything with it. So, what things do pilots especially hate when trying to interact with the flag? Layers upon layers of explosives, for the most part. By saturating a flag, be it either in base or out in the field, with triple threat grenades, you're completely shutting it down and being interacted with for long periods of time. This is totally possible to accomplish with a 40mm cannon as well, but in my opinion the triple threat is much more readily lethal in awkward mid-map scenarios, as well as saturating buildings quite a bit deeper than the 40mm can reach, that in this particular case I think it might actually outperform the 40mm a little bit. So that's just kind of my opinion, but the 40mm is still decent at doing that as well. If you mix some electric smoke in with those grenade volleys, you're suddenly shutting down an area for upwards of 10 seconds at a time. Cluster missiles and auto-nuclear ejections just add to the lockdown that a loadout like this can provide. It honestly does become possible to prevent an enemy team from even touching your flag or their own for a huge percentage of the time that's out of base. Like, just think about it. Triple threat shot 4 times, then you drop electric smoke. By the time electric smoke is activated and running, you are starting to be ready to fire triple threats again. You can start firing your triple threats a second time around, and by the time those are done exploding, you can drop a cluster missile on top of the flag. By the time that cluster missile is done exploding, you now have another reloaded triple threat to shoot 4 times into the room, and your electric smoke might not quite be ready by that point, but you can play some games with staggering the amount of time in which you're delaying your triple threat grenades, so you can fire them 1, 2, 3, 4 at full speed, or you can kind of go 1, 2, 3, 4 and just really and stagger them, right? So it makes it even harder for enemy pilots to try and play around those staggered explosion times, and by doing so you're actually working towards getting that electric smoke up a little bit faster. Well, not faster, but a little bit more within the cadence of the lockdown that you are trying to provide. And you can lock areas down for like upwards of 10 seconds at a time, and it's really great when it works out the way that you really want it to, like that. If you mix in auto-eject with nuclear ejections, like, you're good, man. You got that thing locked down for 20,000 years at a time. Like, enemy pilots just cannot interact with the flag, period. They just they can't do it. They will die, and they're very liable to not even touch the flag. So, yeah, it's pretty hard for them to do anything about that. So, there is something to be said about completely disallowing touches. And, the 40mm, and I guess even the quad rocket, you could argue that they could fill a really similar niche. And they probably can. That's probably true. But there's something to be said about how often, while trying to do the same thing with a 40mm quad, you can actually allow enemy pilots to interact with the flag and at least just touch it and then die immediately after. Whereas the triple threat will often kill them before they can even get to that flag. So the triple threat in that instance seems a little bit more proactive to me, and if you're running with an organized team, has the potential to be a really great weapon. Keep in mind though, All this stuff that I've been talking about is very situational, and you probably could substitute a 40 mil or quad rocket into that position and do reasonably well. There's a reason that in competitive play, whenever you have a friendly pilot who's about to capture the flag in your own base, and is bringing the enemy flag back to yours, there's a reason that all the friendly 40 mil players are instantly going to turn around and start shooting cluster missiles at 40 mils directly on that flag stand, because they're not going to slow down or stop your friendly pilot, but they're going to kill the crap out of any enemy pilot that tries to get in there. So, they're also performing that same lockdown, just on a smaller, more precise and a shorter duration scale. So that's kind of where this whole idea even stemmed from to begin with. Triple threat just takes it up to the next level. The top 3 Titan weapons start to blend together a lot more. It's hard to really classify any one as being unequivocally superior to the others, but we're gonna give each of them some arbitrary rankings, and really the bottom line here is that all 3 of these weapons are pretty much the entire Titanfall weapon meta, Titan weapon meta, in and of themselves, right? Like, these previous three weapons are all niche picks that are almost never used, but these next 3 are the whole meta. It's just the 3-weapon meta, pretty much. So here we go. Number 3, it's going to be the chain gun. It's an extremely straightforward weapon. Stand back, see bad guy, shoot bad guy. So no travel time, large magazine size, excellent damage versus all targets. Pilots melt before you, and Titans undergo dozens of little bee stings that start to add up really quickly. Pair this with an Atlas using core accelerator, and focus on always shooting grunts when you have the opportunity, and you're going to have damage core up all the time. Damage core chain gun is nothing short of fearsome when it's being combined with friendly Titans or pilots closer to the front line, also engaging targets. It's just constant pressure and punishment on an enemy team that enters your sights, plain and simple. So this weapon is extremely reliable, and you'd be a fool not to have it at least as a one-of in your team in all game modes. So there's really nothing bad about this weapon whatsoever. Well, of course, it's not ideal in close range. It's certainly a lot better than a railgun, and it can hold its own, especially if you have damage core up, and especially because if an enemy Titan's close to you, hitting their critical hit points is going to be really simple, because they're going to be nice and juicy big for you. So you can punish people with that chain gun when you get really close to them very effectively. One of the most popular loadouts for chain guns is actually going to be with electric smoke instead of using the particle wall like everybody else, just because a chain gun Titan is generally going to be all the way in the back. You're going to be the very last Titan in line. You're going to be all the way in the back corner. So you don't really need the particle wall all the way back there. But the thing you really got to worry about more is a stealth pilot who is going to work his way around your team and getting on your back that way. If an enemy pilot were to get on your back and you're in the very back of your line of Titans, then you're in a pretty bad position. You have to call out to one of your teammates to turn around, and you have also got to turn around, and they got to shoot the guy off your back. And if they jump off and you got a big freaking mess on your hands, you got 2 Titans that have stopped DPSing the enemy team, and they can start to push forward a lot more effectively, and it gets to be really bad really quick. It can spiral out of control. But that electric smoke gives you more time to react. It gives you time to deal with these issues without having to rely on teammates. It lets you just get away from that scenario, give your team time to react and help you out and deal with that pilot, and then get back to killing Titans. And that's a huge part of what makes a chain gun good, is not the electric smoke or whatever, but the idea that it is a team-based weapon, right? It's something that you need to work with your team with to make it really good, but if you work with your team effectively, this becomes by far one of the best Titan weapons in the game. Like, it's just a substantially powerful weapon. In second place, I'm just going to go ahead and put the 40 mil cannon there. So, viable at all ranges. Hits ridiculously hard on critical hits, high fire rate given the damage per shot, insta-gib on pilots. It's just a fantastic weapon. Hipfire spread is pretty tight at close ranges, and it's super easy to quick scope with the 40 mil on each shot to minimize your ADS slow walking time and maximize your non-ADS normal walking speed time. That was a mouthful, and hopefully you could understand that big run-on sentence. But basically, what that means is, if you've been watching all the 40 mil clips that have been playing throughout this video, you'll notice a lot of times that I will just aim down sights for a fraction of a second at a time before taking a shot, and then return to not aiming down sights. I don't linger in my ADS. That's because while you're raising the gun up and aiming down sights with it, like you do, it slows your walking speed down to a crawl. But while you're just holding the weapon by your side at the ready for hip fire, so you're not holding aim down sights or left trigger or whatever, then you walk at your normal walking speed. So why would you aim down sights constantly if you only have to do it just to bring that accuracy, the accuracy bloom back tight to make your shots accurate? So you hopefully, I'm sorry I'm not articulating this very well, but basically it allows you to remain mobile while keeping your shots perfectly accurate as well. So I'm sure as you're watching this and you're seeing the clips, you'll start to understand, now that I explain it a couple of times, why I'm doing that, and it'll start to make sense to you, and maybe you'll start doing it as well, because it's really, really important to being effective with the 40 mil in one-on-one fights, and then really in any fight. It is a fundamental thing that you have to learn to do and do well. Anyways, this weapon allows you to remain evasive while dishing out some of the best DPS in the game at all the ranges you'd reasonably find outside of LTS. So really, I can't reiterate this enough. This weapon has no downsides whatsoever. With extended mag, ammo in fights is usually not much of a concern. Only time you're liable to fall short is probably in an Atlas versus Atlas 1 versus 1 or an Atlas versus Strider 1v1 if you miss a few too many shots. While these situations do happen pretty regularly, reloading one time and then killing somebody can in some cases be an easier pill to swallow than the constant delay between shots of, say, an arc cannon. Basically, the most common Titan loadout out there is as follows. It's going to be an Atlas with 40mm cannon using extended mags, particle wall, cluster missile, shield quick charger, core accelerator. That is like the bare bones skeleton that everybody in competitive play uses. Of course, you're always going to have some twists on that. Some people are going to throw nuclear eject in there or whatever, but this is what a lot of people run. And the reason I bring it up now is that the ability to bring up big damage against both pilots and Titans while remaining both mobile, survivable, and versatile is unmatched with a setup like this. You can't do this with an Ogre. You can kind of do this with a Strider, but that's kind of a side grade more than anything else. If you drop a 40 mil on an Atlas and learn to really aim it well, your DPS is extremely hard to match. In addition, you cause the enemy's aim to kick up so much when hitting them, especially on critical hits, that you're liable to cause the enemy to miss some shots on you due to recoil that's out of their control. If you think about it in a different way, that's almost like getting extra health by using this weapon, just like you'd get with the plasma railgun if you hit fully charged shots at the perfect moment, but this is a lot more reliable. Before I ramble for too much longer though, there's no situation you'll find outside of LTS, and consistently goosing enemy pilots in which the 40 mil is not the best thing you can slap on your Titan, unless it's an arc cannon. The arc cannon is, in its current state, a monstrosity of a weapon. Big damage and CC in the form of a slow and blind on those hit by it, and it can hit more than one target at the same time. Do I really have to say any more? You drop an enemy Titan's shields, you slow him down if he's in a sprint, blind him so he can't shoot you back, and you knock his aim up because the aim kick is directly correlated to spike damage taken, and you even blind a couple of his buddies as well? Like, what the heck? Why would you not use this weapon? Oh, and did I mention that it's also hit scan, meaning that there's no travel time, and charging it doesn't require you to aim down sights and crawl around the battlefield like the railgun, and let's not forget that it one-shots pilots on a direct hit, and if damage cores up, it'll kill an enemy pilot outright on the first arc. So that means you can shoot a Titan who has a pilot standing next to it, and if you have damage core on, you'll kill the pilot instantly. What? So you don't even have to reload this weapon. Like, the only limiting factors here are the time it takes to charge, which when played around can actually be more of a benefit than it is a curse, as well as its hard limit on the distance at which you can fire and deal damage. So, past a certain distance, the beam shot by this weapon simply stops traveling and deals no damage beyond that, just like the pilot shotgun. Seems like that would be a pretty damning downside of this weapon, but as it turns out, most of the engagements that you're going to be having in this game are not long range enough to even make that a factor. This is especially true outside of LTS, so let's say we're playing on Angel City. There's very few places that you might be out of range of an opponent on that map, and it's really easy to just play around those few locations, and they become a non-issue pretty readily. So basically, this weapon is reliable in all situations versus all targets, just like the 40mm chain gun. It's easy mode... Oh, let's see what I was saying there. It's easy mode hitting airborne pilots with this weapon. For most people, it's even easier than the chain gun, which is halfway built for that scenario anyways. So it insta-kills at least one pilot per shot, drops an entire enemy group of minions per shot, and does an inconceivable amount of work against enemy titans. This weapon's ubiquity, you can't match it, just straight up. It can't be matched. So frankly, if you're not playing a competitive match that limits arc cannons, having a team with like 3 of them is pretty ridiculous, as long as you back them up with some 40mm to hammer crits after you drop the shields and you CC them with your arc cannon. If you want to win and don't care about using blatantly overpowered weapons and ruining the game for everyone else, you should pick this weapon every time. But if you have any semblance of honor or class or dignity, you really just don't pick this weapon in a public match. Like, even if it's a one-of, like, you're just rude. Don't do it. Just run a 40mm or chain gun or something crappy like a quad rocket. Like, it's not necessary to ever be running an arc cannon. It's too overpowered. So, anyways, guys, since this video has been going on for so long already, let's just wrap up the rest of your Titan pick choices in kind of more of a lightning round. So, I don't want to keep you all here for much longer because I know you're just going to fall asleep on me if you haven't already. So, first up, let's talk about attachments for Titan weapons that I didn't really touch on already. So, we got the Railgun Instant Shot, just trash. No benefit over using it over 40mm extended mags, or even burst fire, just, there's no point. Don't pick it. You're going to hurt yourself more than help yourself, period. Triple threat with Minefield. So, this is also trash, and it's usually banned in competitive play. Once you have 9 grenades, which is 3 trigger pulls, planted on the map, any subsequent shots will cause your original set to explode instantly, and this is pretty much always going to be without any positive effect for you whatsoever. It's never going to kill somebody that didn't trip one of the triple threat grenades, because you can't avoid tripping them. They will trip. So it's just not useful. If your Titan was able to use a secondary weapon, I might be able to see this as a useful pick. If you had like a Titan pistol you could use, that might be reasonable. But since that's not a possibility, this is just straight up the worst Titan attachment in the game. Never pick it, ever. Chain Gun Accelerator. This forces you to use the chain gun in a way that it's not meant to be used, and you might as well just use a 40mm instead at the range and playstyle you have to use this weapon. So again, 40mm is just going to be more damage and more reliable, and you're putting the chain gun in a situation it's not supposed to be used in. Just bad. Don't pick it. 40mm burst fire. This is actually totally fine. The 40mm with extended mags, as it stands, is actually pretty borderline OP in my opinion, but I'm not really sure what else they could do to slightly nerf the regular 40mm without completely killing it. The 40mm burst fire is actually right about where the power level of the weapon should be, in my opinion. If you're hitting crits with all 3 shots back to back, your DPS is through the roof, and it's better than the regular 40mm. If you're not hitting a lot of these shots as crits, then the regular 40mm creeps back up as an equivalent DPS, with the added benefit of one-shotting pilots. So, the burst fire 40mm doesn't really do that at all. A direct hit with one of your 3 shots from burst fire 40mm will do 180 damage out of a pilot's total 200 health, so it actually doesn't kill them. You're hitting them with a shell that is like almost as big as their torso and explodes. You're hitting them with it directly and it doesn't freaking kill them. So yeah, that's a big downside of that burst fire. But your splash damage is going to be, overall improved because you're going to have 3 explosives going off instead of 1. So hooray, you can splash down enemy pilots a little bit better. Awesome, that's fine. I think it's still a pretty well-balanced attachment, though, so totally viable to pick. Maybe not on a competitive level, but for casual games, it's great. It's fun. I use it all the time. I have a good time with it whenever I pick it. Arc Cannon without capacitor, LOL. It's got terrible range, longer charge time than capacitor Arc Cannon for worse damage. You can't feather the trigger to hold a charge and let it go whenever you want. It accentuates all the bad parts of the weapon while also nerfing the good parts. Like, I guess it's fun to double tap pilots with it without a charge, but it's worthless outside of that. It would maybe be usable by ogres if the uncharged shot had a big CC with nearly no damage. So you could use an ogre to lead the charge and just CC the crap out of enemy titans while your atlases deal damage behind you. Maybe that could be reasonable, but I have no way of really knowing because you can't try it in a real game because that's not possible. So, yeah, oh well. Moving over to Ordnance. Cluster missile always. If you're playing LTS, slaved warheads and multi-target missiles are viable and a lot of fun to use, especially the multi-target missiles. Clusters are just too good at punishing enemy Titans blowing their dashes though. Count their dashes and wait for them to blow the last one, or predict them blowing the last one, and drop a cluster at their feet, wherever they're going to end up. They have no good method of getting out of that situation without taking huge damage one way or another, plus it's free fire, meaning no lock-on required. So there's only one rocket fired, so you don't have to impede your aim of your primary weapon by aiming it too closely. It wrecks pilots and denies them space, or boosts friendly pilots, I should say. It gives them momentum if used in specific ways. You can, I guess, credit War Spirit for making a video on that a while ago. Cluster missiles pretty much rule. Rocket salvo kind of drools. There's no situation in which the rocket salvo outperforms any other ordnance at all. It takes way too long to fire the whole thing, and the rockets are so slow and hard to aim because they don't leave your Titan in a straight line. You have to account for the spiral pattern in which they leave your Titan, yada yada yada, just bad pick. They have a lot of issues, and they're pretty useless. Do yourself a favor and pick anything else. As for your Titan kits, those are pretty much up to your discretion. Nothing is particularly terrible except for Dome Shield Generator, because there are situations, or maybe it's Dome Shield Battery, I don't know, it's the one that makes your Dome Shield last for like 10 years instead of like 5 seconds or whatever. So, yeah, that one is kind of weird just because there's bugs associated with that kit that cause your Titan's Dome Shield to not actually get the benefits of that time extension like it's supposed to. So pretty much, if you call your Titan and you die between when you press your button to call it and when it actually touches the ground, like, you know, when it's actually literally falling from the sky, if you die during that period, you're considered dead. Your kit does not activate, and your Titan does not actually get that Dome Shield buff. By the way, is that Dome Shield buff, is that a pilot kit or is that a Titan kit? I don't even freaking remember, but if it's a Titan kit, then it's terrible, don't pick it. If it's a pilot kit, then I'm a moron and ignore me. I don't even remember, and I'm too far into this to want to go back and fix that little thing, but assuming that it is a Titan kit, don't pick it. If it's not, then whatever, it's fine. Also, the Guardianship has had very questionable effectiveness since day one. I'd avoid picking it, since piloting your Titan is pretty much always better than letting it just get itself killed and not do anything good for your team whatsoever. I mean, I guess it's fun if you put like an Ogre with quad rockets on defense in the middle of B point on Relic if you're playing hardpoint. Like, I've had some decent success there, but that's literally it. That's the only time that I've had my Titan actually do something positive for me. Otherwise, it was just garbage. And every time I try to make it be good at being an auto Titan, it's just bad. Don't use it. Just pilot your Titan, please, or don't call it in at all. But the big things that I would recommend is if you're on a Strider, Dash Quick Charger is awesome, Core Accelerator is awesome. If you're on an Atlas, you're probably going to want to be running Core Accelerator and Shield Recharger, Shield Quick Charger, whatever it's called, the one that makes your shield recharge faster once that recharge begins. Doesn't recharge sooner, just faster once that recharge does naturally start. For Ogre, I actually like Big Punch with Particle Wall, just because you can tank a bunch of damage and drop Particle Wall in a very offensive position, stop taking damage, let your shields recharge. If an enemy tries to charge you, Big Punch the crap out of them. Yeah, it's pretty good. That's about the only way I've really had success with an Ogre, is doing stuff like that. Anyways, I think that's just about all that I wanted to cover. That's my thoughts on the current metagame and what you should pick, what you shouldn't pick, why stuff is actually good or why stuff is actually terrible and you shouldn't use it outside of like regen challenges. If you have any questions or comments or anything, feel free to leave them down below, and you know, if I am feeling up to it, I will address them, and if I'm not feeling up to it, then I won't. We'll see as the days go on and how good your comments are, if they're actually provocative in a good way and not just like, well, I don't know, man, I do a lot of work with the quads, it's pretty good. It's like, well, I'm not gonna answer that. But if you actually give me like a reasonable prompt, then yeah, I'm happy to answer and discuss with you. So anyways, guys, thank you all for watching. Hope you learned something new. If you did, please like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. If not, whatever, I don't care. But it's all up to you guys. So thank you for watching. See you next time. Take care. Bye.